Hey, I'm Emma Gala and welcome to Paint It Blak. Today in the studio, I have Megan Krakouer, who's here to tell me a bit about your work. Welcome, Megan.
Hey Emma, how are you?
Good. I'm so excited that you're here in the studio to talk a bit about the importance of what you do and the work you're undertaking at the moment. But before we start, could you just tell me who you are and what sort of work that you do?
And Emma, it's always good to come here and be with you and the conversations that we have. It's actually really quite helpful because it educates so many people right across, not only in Western Australia, but across the country about issues that are impacting First Nations people today. So where I come from, little place called Mount Barker, small country town, youngest of 13 children, from the Krakouer region. But basically just here to have a yarn with you about some of the pertinent issues that are impacting on First Nations people, not only in Western Australia, but across the country.
And you do a lot of work through the Suicide Prevention Project. Yeah. Could you tell me a bit about that?
So I'm the director with the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project, and we provide that intense psychosocial support, the assertive outreach, which is 24/7. My colleague and I, we've worked with about 30,000 people right across the country in the last 5 years. Issues around incarceration, suicide, child removals, homelessness, basically anything that impacts on First Nations people that fall below the poverty line. There's an unmet need in terms of the work that we do, and basically it's all provided with that love, support, care and respect, and always trying to galvanise the outcomes and educate the broader public just in relation to the issues that are impacting on us on a daily basis. So, for example, right across the country, First Nations people fall below the poverty line by 40%. In Western Australia, it's 60%. 1 in 12 Aboriginal men are in prison today. In terms of Banksia Hill, where there is a class action in relation to the state government, Banksia Hill that opened up in 1997, there's been about 20,000 children that have gone through Banksia Hill, and you hear the stories of oppression and really a lot of sad things about the inhumane practices and treatment. There was a young boy, Cleveland Dodd, rest in peace, he recently passed away, October 2023, where there's been 2 tranches of a coronial inquest and a 3rd tranche which is happening between the 7th and the 9th of October. So we've been providing that intense support to the families, and the support doesn't just stop between 9 to 5, it extends after 5 o'clock on the week, and just being there, showing that love, showing that care, showing that support, and basically trying to help them with their arc of issues and just keeping it real.
And you said 30,000 people over the last 12 months. That's a lot of people.
30,000 in the last 5 years.
On the last 5 years.
Yeah, and that's very much right across the country. So, today there's a colleague of mine, she's in federal court assisting a family member. There's another colleague who was in court yesterday trying to help another family member with the issues that they were facing. But, suicides in Western Australia is really quite tragic, and it's actually increased in terms of First Nations people. Right across the country, First Nations suicides have gone from 1 in 23 to 1 in 16, which makes it the leading cause of death for our people under the ages of 44.
It's horrible.
It's absolutely atrocious.
Do you know the reasons why that those numbers are increasing?
There's the cost of living is having a draconian impact on everyone right across the country, and in the last 3 years, right across the country, black, white and brown, there's been 10,000 suicides, and that has been, in my mind, is a crisis in this day and age, particularly when you've got an affluent country like Australia, which is the 12th richest economy in the world, and yet we're losing people, black, white and brown, at alarming rates to this horrible thing called suicide. In terms of First Nations people, the majority of our people that are taking their lives fall below the poverty line. A couple of days ago, we've also had another young person that's no longer here, but this is very much thematic right across the country, and it's just heartbreaking when you're sitting at a hospital, there's a life support machine, and then you see the life support machine being turned off on an 11-year-old or a 16-year-old. It is heartbreaking. It's something that you never forget. And then you think, what can we do in this moment to help this family, and very much invoke the systemic repair which is much needed. And a lot of it comes through that public consciousness by the education of people right across the country in terms of the pertinent issues that are impacting on our First Nations people right now. And then you only have to look at the closing the gap targets in terms of suicides, incarceration, even child removals. It's not closing. And that's evident with the Productivity Commission report that's come out each year, and very much stating that those statistics are getting worse, and it's really cruel. And I guess one of the things in terms of why I do it and what I do, it's for the love of our community. My voice doesn't belong to the oppressor, it belongs to the oppressed. And being soaked in the grim reality of our people, where you're seeing death, where you're seeing unfairnesses, you're seeing biasness, and you're seeing the discrimination, you have to raise your voice, whether it be through rallies, media, whatever means are available to educate the public, so you can work ways forward. And that's about having those strong relationships. But at the same time, I have to be committed and also ensure that my voice belongs to the people.
It's a really hard job, what you do, because you're talking to families in their most tragic moment in their life that they can experience after the death of a loved one. How do you do it, or what motivates you?
I think that this is my calling. Like, I've worked around in many places with government, in the private sector, many different places right across the country. You go back several years ago, I was working with No More Legal Service, which was set up in response to the Royal Commission into Institutional Response to Child Sexual Abuse. And then I went into 27 prisons right across the country, and you see things through a different lens, through a different perspective in terms of why people were offending. And then working up at Acacia Prison, that's the biggest prison in Western Australia, where there's 1,500 men that are there. And of that, 1/3 of the population are First Nations. So when working up at Acacia Prison, there was 525 fellas that we were working with, and, I had Christmas Day up there, and one of the fellas reckoned, "How come you're here? Why are you not with your family?" I said, I am with family, but you mob are in here. Why I do it is because I love our mob. And I think it's hurtful when you see the tears and the pain and the wrongdoings that's being perpetrated against our mob right now. So, for example, you've got the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody in 1991 with the 339 recommendations. There has not been a conviction. And it's hurtful when you see that there is wrongdoing and people are responsible for the deaths of some of these ones, but there's been no conviction whatsoever, and that's really quite upsetting. How I get through the days, it's just the love of the people. I can ring up any of the families that I work with or that I yarn with and so forth, and that's where I get my strength from those families, because some of the families, "Hey Megan, come around for a feed, come around for a yarn, come around for a coffee." And then you go there and it's just nothing but pure love, and it's just kick back, relax, chill. But yeah, I mean, in terms of seeing death after death after death and being in those rooms when life support machines are turned off, of course it has an impact. And as a result, you get to a point where you become numb to it. So when I go to funerals, for example, I can't cry anymore. When I see some sad stuff, I can't cry. Yes, I feel sorry. Yes, I feel sad. Yes, I feel hurt. But straight away, I basically kick in, what kind of supports can I give to this family right now to help ease the burden, help ease the pressure, help ease the pain in some kind of respect. So, and I think it's a lot to do with our ancestors and our old people, and keep the fight going in terms of the black struggle that we currently have right across this country in relation to First Nations people.
One of the things you mentioned that I just wanted to touch on as well is you said that you're helping people in these moments where it's really hard, but how can we stop Aboriginal people from going down that path and feeling like it's a way out? How do we prevent suicide?
Back in the 70s and 80s, it was around the self-determination and self-management. And in all these different towns, we've seen Aboriginal organisations, and they were well funded by the government in terms of secretaries, coordinators, and they provided a service to the communities, and that was actually powerful and it was really quite profound. Today, in terms of a lot of the support and a lot of the services, they do some really strong work. But the majority of our people that fall below the poverty line don't access some of these services. And when you're trying to prevent and avoid suicides and so forth, you have to be there. You have to give people hope, that radical empathy, the radical transformation. Right now across the country around the Christmas period, and we know that's the elevated risk period, you'll see a lot of the Aboriginal organisations, they close. And that, to me, should not happen, because if we want to help people, if we want to save people, if we want to actually improve life circumstances, those big organisations, they cannot close their doors during that period, and there needs to at least be that skeleton staff. There also needs to be that intense psychosocial support, the assertive outreach, which is 24/7. That needs to happen irrespective of whether it's the Christmas period or all through the year, because we are losing people at alarming rates, and rates that are unprecedented in Western Australia and indeed across the country. So there are a couple of things. There also needs to be strong investments into all these local towns with their regional corporations and empowering people and giving people hope. CDUP, I know there's mixed emotions around that, the Commonwealth Development Employment Program. Many years ago, that, particularly in small country towns and remote locations, that very much existed, and that gave people something to do. And there was a team, there was people, there was a support crew and so forth. In many parts of Australia, that no longer exists. You only have to go up into the remote communities. There's 1,200 remote communities. And of that, there's about 120,000 people that live in the remote communities, but 35,000 children will never get an education. So in the sense of actually reducing and bringing the suicide and the self-harms rate down, it's basically people. We need to be able to go out, yarn, speak, talk, provide that support all hours a day. Like in terms of my phone, I'll get messages 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. People just need to have a way forward. A lot of our people are born into poverty, and that's the truth of it. So what you'll see is a cost of living. The cost of living, that's increased, but in terms of Centrelink, that's very much remained stagnant for the last 10 years. So you'll see a lot of people that fall below the poverty line, some of our brothers and sisters, and they're struggling to live, they're struggling to survive. And then you put into the fact that the intergenerational trauma that a lot of our people have actually endured since the decimation period, where we've seen so many people that have come through, and there's been the stolen generation, there's been the establishment of the missions and so forth. But there's a lot of issues that very much need to be brought to the forefront, and the way forward on that is basically getting groups of people right across the country that have lost someone to suicide to speak their truth, to speak their realities, and speak about what happened to them in terms of losing their loved ones. The answers are there. Right now, in terms of the crisis with the suicides right across the country, whether you're black, white or brown, it's not been given the right amount of attention that's needed, whether it's West Australian government or whether it's the federal parliament. And that, to me, is an indictment.
And tell me about your T-shirt that you're wearing today. So I know that recently you ran a rally at Parliament House around missing Aboriginal men, to try and put a focus on it for the government to do something about it. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So up in the northwest of Western Australia, there's been about 7 dear souls that have disappeared, and the families don't know what's going on. This young man here, his name is Wesley. He disappeared in October of 2022. His family's been searching. They put their own resources into trying to find out where Wesley is, and there hasn't been anything whatsoever. So there was a group of family members realising that one had gone from Geraldton, Brome, Roban, Port Hedland, and they, several months ago, they organised all these different rallies in their own regional locations, and that was really powerful. And then the families approached me about a month ago, and they said, listen, we're actually going to go to Parliament House because we want our voices heard. There's going to be a petition which is going to be tabled by the Peter Collier, MLA for the Liberal Party, which he did. So we actually went about this path about organising this rally down here. So the protest rally up at Parliament House, that started at 10 o'clock, and there were families all over Western Australia for that. And it was actually beautiful in the sense that there was a show of that solidarity, that kindness, that care, and that want for answers, and for the government and also the police department to do more in terms of the searches of these dear souls. So there was about 300 people that attended that, and then when we finished from there, there was a protest rally that occurred on the streets of the CBD, and that was really quite powerful. That was attended by about 100 people. There was some noise, there was people that spoke their truth, but it was a massive sign of solidarity. And from there, we went back to our office, the National Suicide Prevention Trauma Recovery Project at Beaufort Street, and there were 8 senior police officers that met with the families, and they had robust, strong conversations in terms of ways forward. What some of the outcomes were is that the police would actually do an investigation to see whether or not there are any links between the missing men. So that was really quite strong in that sense. The relationship will continue to build and continue to grow, and so too will the campaigns and the advocacy around that. Senator Dorinda Cox, she's written to the Australian Federal Police for them to have oversight of the police investigations in Western Australia in relation to the missing men. The families have publicly called for a task force to be set up and to examine and why this has occurred. So they've got this one peak body doing all the investigations to see whether or not there's any linkages and so forth. Those cries for that to occur has fallen upon deaf ears at this point. They've actually called for the strengthening of legislation in many cases, and this is where there seems to be that discrimination or perceived discrimination, because there's non-Indigenous people that have been offered rewards, $25,000, $50,000, $1 million. But in terms of these gentlemen that have disappeared, there's no reward offered whatsoever. In relation to rewards being offered, there has to be shown that there is some criminality that is attached to it. Well, these boys haven't just gone missing. These men haven't just gone missing. They're loved by their families. They're cared by their families, and families know where they are at all times. In the case of Wesley, he was very, very strong with his family, and they lived on a community about 30 kilometres out of Port Hedland, and there's 9 houses, so it's their own community block in that sense. They have no idea where he is. There's been police dogs, there's been some kind of police efforts in terms of searches and so forth. But having a yarn with Mum today, she just feels so depressed and so hurt, and it's having a huge impact on her mental health, and she just needs that police help and that police support. But what we want to see in terms of whether or not there's criminality, the families want to see rewards offered. They want to see that there is a dedicated task force set up specifically to bring these men home.
Do you know if there have been any rewards for missing Aboriginal people in Western Australia, financial rewards?
Since 2022, October, since Wesley's disappeared, there have been other First Nations men that have disappeared. There has been no reward offered whatsoever. And as mentioned earlier, there has to be a criminality aspect for the police to be able to offer rewards. So our community, and it was very much advocated for, it was very much stipulated by the various speaks, what's the difference? Our men would have come home. There has to be some criminality. There has to be some kind of wrongdoing, because they were very loved and very supported. So they just want to see that parity of equality. If it's applied to one, and this is very much about the rule of law, if it's applied to one, it should be applied for all. And at the moment, these families are feeling hurt because they feel like the law is not in favour of them, and especially when they've had to go out and carry out their own investigations, and that's just been really hurtful. The supports aren't there, and what's actually happening is that there's a lot of angst in our community, and as a result, challenges are therefore persisting.
You mentioned earlier as well that you're looking at if there's links between these men. What do you mean by that?
There's too much of a disconnect, whether it's Broome Police, whether it's Port Hedland Police, whether it's the police in Geraldton. There's too much of a disconnect, and families want to know if there's a linkage between the disappearances of these men. And if there isn't, rule it out. But that won't be established until such time that there is a task force, and that task force has to be dedicated to ensure that the families' answers and their questions are being answered for in a strong, adequate way, and basically giving some serious attention to this. You know, when I was up in Geraldton and speaking to the mum and the partner of Brenton Shah, it's just really sad. It's cruel. And, you know, like, he's got little babies. And then I go to Port Hedland and I speak to Joanne Taylor, who's the mum of Wesley, and it's the same story. And this can't continue to happen. They just want to know where their loved ones are and how we can bring them home. And that's why they were called really quite strongly for the establishment of a task force.
Yeah. What has inspired you to continue this work?
What's actually inspired me are the families with the campaigns that they've run. That's been absolutely incredible, and they're leaving no stone unturned. They're making sure that their voices are heard. So I must pay homage and credit to all the families that have actually brought this campaign to light so we can help fight with the families the issues that they're facing.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all about the work you're doing and the importance of suicide prevention, and also highlighting the issues that need to happen for missing Aboriginal men. So thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure.
No, good fun.
Thank you everyone for watching. If you're interested in supporting the work that Megan's doing, please check the description box below where we'll include some links. Thanks for watching Paint It Blak with me, Emma Garlett.